2023 Literary Web3 Conference by introducing Professor Pierre Gervois. He was born in Paris, France in 1969 and immigrated to the United States in 2013. He is a crypto artist and an adjunct professor at New York University, teaching communications and advertising. He is also a panelist at the Brooklyn Art Council for grants for Brooklyn artists. Welcome, Professor Pierre.
Thank you, and you please call me Pierre. Thank you so much, Bella, for this way too kind introduction.
Okay, I'm going to go offline here, and the stage is all yours. We are being recorded.
Okay, thank you very much, Bella. I appreciate it a lot. Hello, everyone. So we're really into very, very friendly company here, and I'm so proud to be among such talented poets and artists that I admire so much. So may I ask to every one of you, Christian, Sasha, and Anna, to introduce yourself for the audience. Let's start by Christian. Can you please introduce yourself, Christian?
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you very kindly for hosting this event, Pierre. My name is Christian Book. I'm an experimental poet of some former global renown. I'm a founding member of a literary movement called Conceptualism that throughout most of the late 90s and early aughts until about 2015 was widely known as a poetic movement responsible for creating poetry that responded very directly to the advent of the internet itself and explored the limit cases of writing. I now find myself grateful to be a member of the Versaverse, a group of poets who are now responding to the new technological affordances of Web 3.0. I'm probably best known for having published a work of poetry entitled Eunoia, a book written in 5 chapters, each of which tells a unique, beautiful story using only one of the 5 vowels. So in the first chapter, I use only the vowel A, and in the second chapter, only the vowel E, exhausting the available lexicon for all of those words. I'm, of course, very interested in the use of computers in the production of poetry and have contributed to discussion and conversation about these topics over the last 25 years. I'm grateful to be here, Pierre, and I look forward to our conversation. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Christian. Sasha Stiles, can you please introduce yourself?
Happy to. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invite, Pierre, and thanks, Bella, for organizing this. I still find it a bit surreal to be in the company of poets like Christian, who's been a huge influence on my own work, and actually, his work is included in the bibliography of my book, Technology. So it's really an honor. I'm a poet. I'm a lifelong writer, as well as a visual artist and also an artificial intelligence researcher. And a lot of my work has to do with the intersection of text and technology, and really thinking about poetry as a kind of code, poetry as one of the earliest human inventions, poetry as a kind of technology in and of itself. I've been, writing and publishing in more traditional ways for decades now. But over the last 10 years or so, I've really been focusing a lot on how to translate my interest in writing about and thinking about our relationship to digital technologies, not just as subjects of my poetry, but really how to embody some of these considerations in the material and the mediums of my writing as well. So, I've been creating digital poems, video poems, multimedia, media-rich poems that involve, not just words themselves, but spoken word, electronically enhanced spoken word, in fact, music, visuals, all sorts of things to really bring text to life in different ways. And I also do quite a lot of work with artificial intelligence, and specifically with natural language processing, which, ChatGPT has been in the news quite a lot lately, and that's something that I've been working with GPT in various forms since 2018, really thinking about what the advent of natural language processing and generative text means for the fate of literature and language at large. I'm also one of the co-founders, along with Anna Maria, of the Versaverse. All of us, all 4 of us are part of the Versaverse, which is really really happy to kind of see all of us here together. The Verse is a poetry NFT gallery, which I think Anna will probably talk about a little bit more, but a gallery that's really dedicated to exploring the possibilities for writing and for poetry in particular on the blockchain. And we've been having a really interesting journey since we launched the Verse at the end of 2021. You know, adventuring through the wilds of language and literature in Web3 and kind of exploring, you know, all the different things that we as writers can do together on the blockchain using all these new technologies and communities that have sprung up there. So I will leave it at that for now. And thank you again so much for having us all here.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Ana Maria Caballero, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. For some reason, my camera is frozen, so I've been turning it on and off. I'm not sure what's going on, but I'll leave it off.
We could see you well a few seconds ago.
But it's frozen in my screen.
I mean, we see you very clearly, so it works.
We can see
it works on your end? Oh,
yes.
Okay, because mine looks frozen. It's so strange. Okay, well, I'm glad that it's working for everyone else. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm just echoing all the thanks and praise for Bella and Pierre for organizing. My name is Ana Maria Caballero, and I am a first-generation Colombian American poet and artist. I've been publishing for nearly 2 decades, both in Spanish and English. I have, with the book that's coming out next month, I have five books out in the world, and one of these is actually an NFT book, which is something that we're going to be digging into and that I'm very, very interested in. I've been turning my published work into spoken word video pieces for a few years now. And so when I learned about Web3, it seemed like a very natural jump for me to take because the works already existed. And it was really, really interesting to find a very engaged, committed, inquisitive audience in Web3, and I think that's definitely something that you know I'd like to discuss more with the other panelists in the future during this conference, because I think that the ability to engage with audience in new ways is one of the magical tools that we get from Web3. Like Sasha said, we co-founded a digital poetry gallery called the Verse. I'm very passionate about onboarding traditional poets and getting them introduced, getting their feet wet in Web3. I think that this helps people who don't normally have access to really wonderful poems find new ways of discovering them. And it also connects poets with a new audience, which is a great thing. And then it also provides an ability to transact poetry, to give it the cultural agency and dynamism that I think it deserves. Personally, my work is very, very much about peeling back the layers of our dialogue, of what we say and don't say in spaces like the home and with people who are closest to us. So yeah, I'll pass the mic back, I guess, to Pierre.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. I would like to kick off our conversation that will remain very casual. I always wondered why there was a separation between conceptual visual artists using text, such as, and this is not an exhaustive list, I'm thinking about Ed Ruscha, Mel Buckner, Gilbert and George, Lawrence Weiner, Barbara Kruger, Jenny Holzer, and the many others who are clearly identified as visual artists, and poets and writers who are also using text in their creative practice. And even in academia, in university, you have these visual artists that were studied in the arts department. You had poets and writers that were studied in the English and literature department, and there was not that much dialogue between them. And my feeling is that the blockchain has been acting as a catalyst. And now we are seeing these two artists who are like separated by an invisible wall, who start to dialogue together. Poets and writers who are using to produce artwork using text on a piece of paper start to say, hey, what if we put our words out there? What if we're having a dialogue with visual artists, with musicians, with sculptors, and see what is happening? And conceptual visual artists using text start to realize that, well, they might be considered poets as well. So I would like to have your thoughts about that, and you are absolutely welcome to completely disagree with me, but it's just to open the conversation. Christian, what do you think?
Thank you, Pierre. I would note that the literary movement that I helped to found, called conceptualism, derives much of its inspiration very directly from the movement in the art world called conceptualism from the late 1960s and early 70s. Like them, we wanted to figure out how to address the limit cases of writing in the history of art. And our own works of poetry are certainly informed by the precedent set by these visual artists who use language. And part of our argument made to our peers at the time was that these divisions of genre were probably less useful now, and could take on a new life in the advent of the internet. That the arrival of this new technological affordance made it possible to rediscover and redefine, reinvent these prior works of textual conceptualism that we see in the art world, transferring them and transforming them more directly and explicitly into the world of literature. These works by visual artists that incorporated text constituted pre-existing canonical works that became immediately adopted by the likes of us and our own poetic peers. Moreover, I think we recognize too that the use of text in the visual arts constitutes a different skill set. It's one thing, of course, to be trained in the idiom of the visual arts, to present work in a gallery, to train yourself to reach a large-scale audience of collectors and museums, galleries, et cetera, who would be capable of exhibiting this work. Having that kind of skill set is perhaps separate from the literary skill set that would be required to produce beautiful text. And on many occasions when we walk into a gallery, see a work on the wall, we poets, I think, would wish that we had at least had a hand perhaps in adjusting or editing or modulating the text that appears on the wall of the conceptual artist. Thinking, oh, it would just be perfect if it could be this just one slight adjustment to the syntax, I don't know, the diction, the brevity of their epigraph that appears as a work of art on the wall. And we hoped, I think, that we would be able to consolidate maybe some of the connections that would arise between those two domains, to, of course, range a little bit further outside the catechism of our literary training in order to address more directly the world of the visual arts. Now, I would suggest that in the wake of the blockchain, this new affordance, new generation of technological affordances, we again come to reinvent those precedents set by conceptual artists who are trying to dematerialize the objecthood of the real artwork, tangible artwork, transform it into something textualized and dematerialized and exchangeable, easily accommodatable to a wide variety of contexts, and make it all the more transactable and easily transferable. And I don't think it's any coincidence that you would then probably go back to the likes of a Jenny Holzer or a Lawrence Weiner and other textual artists from the 60s and 70s and find purchase again in their precedents. Certainly, my gang of people found that this was a useful starting spot for our dialogue with the art world.
Thank you very much, Christian. Sasha, what do you think about this particular approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's really interesting to be thinking about word and image and how they kind of intertwine. When we think back to the very origins of language, like letters started as images, right? Like letters began as pictures and sort of evolved from there. And now we're in a moment where I think a lot of us are, you know, we use emojis kind of as a default way of communicating with one another. And you know, there's a very visual element to a lot of our communications. So it's really interesting how we have this sort of implicit dichotomy between word and image when they're so related to one another in so many ways. So that's definitely something that's been at the back of my mind for a while. I think I said before, I'm a lifelong poet, but I'm also a lifelong lover of text-based art. And some of my earliest and most formative experiences were going to museums with my parents when I was probably like a toddler or like a kindergartner and seeing Cy Twombly's work. And, you know, falling in love with kind of the gestures of this kind of semi-understandable or semi-legible language. And, you know, I grew up really adoring the work of people that you mentioned, like Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger and Glenn Ligon and John Baldessari. And, you know, Bruce Nauman is another one of my most formative influences. Not someone who I think is ever considered a poet in any sense of the word, but who really understood at a very deep level the connection between words themselves and the material and the medium and like the tangibility of how they're presented and how they're brought into the world and how much that shapes their reception and their meaning. So I think I've always been really interested in poetry and in language from that point of view. I've never, to be really honest, I don't think I ever quite felt right at home in the very sort of traditional literary establishment where the focus was on text itself, sort of like naked, unadorned text, just, you know, because I felt like there was something in my own interest that really drew me to play more with the materiality of language. I'm very, very interested in how things like fonts and colors and animation and just all sorts of, you know, tangible and palpable materials really impact the way that language manifests itself in the way that it finds its readership and makes its way into the world. So yeah, I think, again, that's always sort of where my head's been at, is wondering like why there is this wall between the two. And when I started publishing, you know, poems really early on, I think I published my first poem in a literary journal when I was in high school. And it was funny to me because you have no control over how it looks on the page, what the journal looks like, what font is used, what typeface, what size, what color, any of that stuff. And to me, that was always such an important part of how I was writing. It was really kind of an intrinsic part of how I thought of a poem was how it looked on the page, and how it felt, and all of those things were really important to me. And I remember, you know, at one point in my sort of my very informal poetry career, because I don't have an MFA or anything like that, but at one point I was in a workshop with the poet Henri Cole, who's just a really, really wonderful, beautiful, very traditional poet. And he was telling us about his collaboration with a really good friend of his, Jenny Holzer, and was kind of narrating his experience collaborating with her to have one of his poems presented, you know, as an art installation. And I think that was the moment that I really understood both the very sort of counterintuitive, again, like splitting apart of these two different practices, but also just the way we've always understood that they really go together in some intuitive way as well. Like there's this very long-standing history of artists and poets working together. And I think, you know, I'm personally very interested in my own creative practice, and also, you know, in sort of the larger movements that are taking place right now in, you know, in really bringing those two things together, and thinking, you know, of myself not just as a poet or as an artist or as an AI researcher, but as all those things together, you know, in one. You don't sort of have to categorize. You can be a poet who also really cares a lot about how you manifest language. You can be an artist who really cares about creating meaning and bringing in your own text, as opposed to kind of reaching to found text or reaching to another writer's materials and bringing that in. So yeah, I think I'm very interested right now in sort of the dissolution of some of these ideas or categorizations of literary ekphrasis on the one hand, and then, you know, artists kind of appropriating language and thinking, you know, why can't we just all sort of kind of transmit our ideas fluidly across those borders and boundaries. And that's really what I've been attempting to do in my work for a very long time.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Anna Maria, what's your take on this particular issue?
I think that poems as they exist, even in the printed page inside a book, are works of art, and should be valued.
Oh, so Anna Maria disappeared. So I guess it's a small technical issue. Okay, she's back. Okay, you're back.
Hi, can you see me? It kicked me
Yes.
out. It was so strange.
We can see you and hear you.
Great, okay. So I was saying that I think that poems as they exist, as they're conceived, are works of art. I think the effort, the desire, the impulse to speak, to communicate, and the craft and care taken to do so, that process, that effort, that editing, that revision, that publishing, that printing, all of it is a work of art. All of these processes can be almost like an onion. You could, you know, peel back each layer, and each layer can stand on its own and deserves to be, you know, lavished in olive oil and served on a beautiful platter. I think, you know, together it's almost hard to see each layer, right, when they're so close together and when they're all so compressed. And I'm really interested in showing that process, in showing a poem in digital form, a long form, you know, narrative, repetitive, rhyming poem, for example, in digital form, presenting it as a work of art, but then also publishing it and presenting that published poem as a work of art, and perhaps even taking a book with one single poem and saying this book is a sculpture. And then the process of editing a book, I think, is really beautiful. And I think there are ways via performance and via artist and audience intervention to share that process and to make it palpable, to make it material, so that people can feel sort of that effort of revision and of editing and of decision, right? Because at the end of the day, the artist is the one who decides if it's pink or if it's red, if the word is small or is it tiny. And those decisions make the artwork. So I think that by involving the audience in that moment of creation, we can point to instances that I think are art that we haven't considered as such really in the past. And I'm really interested in ways that we can then communicate those moments, turning them into digital or physical manifestations of themselves, and then transact them, and activating poetry in that way, and activating verse in that way, and activating the writing process in that way, sort of creating fresh cycles of valuation and of exchange and of dialogue around the process and output of writing. Yeah, really interested in exploring all that.
Thank you very much, Anna. And the blockchain allows something fundamental, that is allowing us to get rid of the burden of physicality. And we are having right now this hesitation and this constant dialogue with physical versus digital. Is the emotion we have when we read a poem on a screen the exact same emotion as when we read the poem in a book, which is a physical object? And I would like each of you to describe this back and forth between the digital experience and the physical experience. Is it exactly the same? How would you characterize the differences from the reader's perspective? Christian. Oh, you're muted. I don't know if I can.
Hello, sorry for the delay. Yoko Ono was very famous for having once said that creating an artwork that would constitute a concept, a work of conceptual art, say an artwork that would be simply the idea of a chair, makes it indestructible. Because even if you actually destroyed the real object, the real chair, it still persists, of course, in your mind. And Lawrence Weiner's famous for saying, if you know about one of my works, then you actually own it. Of course, because the work itself is just a concept of the original artwork, having some understanding of its idea that informs it means that it, of course, now becomes yours. And its transmission as an idea, as a concept, probably makes it something indestructible. In this sense, it's maybe like a meme, perhaps an exchangeable kind of viral material that finds its way through culture through these processes of transference and exchange. I like this idea, though. If you burn the chair, it still persists in your mind, and by virtue of it persisting in your mind, it has been lent a certain indestructibility. And I think that, you know, to respond to Anna Maria Caballero's wonderful idea that poetry really does deserve a place among other artifacts in the art world, but it doesn't seem to find its place there very easily, probably in part because it's a less materialized form of art. In the same way that music, for example, doesn't easily find itself positioned in a gallery as a separate object at home in that space. It's because music and poetry are among the most dematerialized of our experiences of art. And I like this idea of attempting to reassert the rightful place of the dematerialized experience of art in the actual setting that is normally reserved for material objects in the art world. The blockchain makes those positionings more feasible, in part because now they're actually consisting of exchangeable artifacts that are easily transferable, ownable. They provide us with an opportunity to experience the work in a diverse variety of ways. So on the one hand, you could of course purchase the actual painting, but if that painting is out of reach because by virtue of its materiality and its unique objecthood, you might nevertheless be capable of saying, I also own this digital artifact that has the same uniqueness, the aura of authenticity around it by virtue of its immortalization on the blockchain, where again you can then exchange it and understand it in a more dematerialized sense, perhaps as an idea that could be conceivably ownable and exchangeable. So we have a new understanding about how, you know, the immaterial art object can, you know, position itself within the context of the art world, and poetry finds, I think, now a new opportunity, a new vantage point from which to assess its importance in the world. So I like this idea that, you know, a poem is a work of art, that the ode equals art, you know, that somehow we can return it to some position or place within the context of the gallery space.
Thank you very much, Christian. Sasha, how would you characterize the different emotions that we're going to experience when we read one of your poems on a screen or when we read one of your poems in a book? Is it different? Do you intend to make a different experience for the viewer?
Yeah, I love that question. And I also have some thoughts on what Christian was just saying that I'll circle back to. But yeah, I mean, I very much am of the mindset that it's not one or the other. I'm also, you know, someone who publishes my work as physical text. I have a very hefty tactile, like physical book out in the world as well as lots of digital publications. And for me, it's really about creating an ecosystem of ideas and experiences and readings. I think that my intention with doing all these different projects in different formats and in different places is to sort of explore an idea through multiple facets. And, you know, I'm very much a bibliophile. I'm very much also like a lover of traditional poetry. You know, and I think they do very, very different things than for example, like what of my video poems or one of my generative poetry collections might do, and they find different audiences. And that's like very much by design and very much the reason why I'm interested in exploring and publishing and writing in all these different directions at the same time. You know, there's also like the very logistical fact that you can read a book offline with no internet and no electricity. And for a lot of, you know, for a lot of Web3 projects, you actually do need to be connected to the internet to experience them. And for a lot of digital pieces, you need to be powered up and all that. So, I mean, there's a lot of those considerations that you know, that I think come to the forefront, in addition to, you know, the very sort of foundational idea that when you're reading, you know, a naked, unadorned poem, it is sort of like running a piece of code in which, you know, you are then opening things up to sort of an infinite possibility of meanings and interpretations. And, you know, I love reading, you know, I love reading books offline because there really is no sort of limit to what direction your mind can take you in, and what kind of images pop into your head, and what the voices of the characters sound like and all that, versus the experience of, you know, engaging with, say, an audiobook or, you know, watching a video poem or something like that. You are hearing a specific voice, you are seeing a specific, you know, color palette. Your sort of your interpretation of the poem or of the text is being shaped in a very specific way. So I think, you know, both of those things are really valid. One is really kind of inviting the reader's imagination to go wild. The other is sort of, you know, taking more of an authorial stance and kind of directing meaning or interpretation in a particular way. And I think both of those things are really intriguing to me, especially as we are on the cusp of this whole era of networked imagination and collaborative, you know, experiences. Thinking about the individual versus the collective, or the collective consciousness, is very much core to a lot of the work that I do. So I think that's another reason, kind of philosophically, why I'm very intrigued in taking these different directions. But, you know, if you'll let me like ramble for 2 more seconds, I just wanted to also say that the question of, you know, the digital and the virtual, I think, and also, you know, in terms of poems versus artworks, something that Christian said, you know, stuck out to me a bit. I think a lot about like reproducibility, and, you know, thinking about things like Benjamin and the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. Like, that's part and parcel of this conversation too. Poetry has often, you know, been devalued historically because it's sort of infinitely reproducible, especially when you're thinking about poetry as kind of just this text that can be presented in myriad voices or different typefaces, or, you know, presented in different journals and anthologies and all that. The poem itself is something that can be infinitely reproduced, and that was always sort of put into contrast against the idea of the work of art as something handcrafted or handmade, and therefore inherently more valuable. And as someone like, you know, Benjamin has pointed out, you know, once you're able to start reproducing artwork, there's this notion that, you know, that somehow devalues the work of art itself. It devalues the aura of that work of art, which, again, like all these conversations, I think, are so interesting when it comes to both blockchain with the advent of, you know, digital ownership, of course, but also in terms of generativity and generative art, generative algorithms, where artwork now becomes something that you can mechanically reproduce in a way that you've never been able to before. So I just wanted to say again, I think there's this idea of reproducibility that is very much at play when we're talking about, you know, valuing text, valuing poetry, valuing art. And I you know, I think that that's certainly been interesting to explore in my own work, but also just seeing what a lot of conceptual writers, people like Kalan Iwamoto, for example, are doing, playing with cryptocurrency, and how that relates to both the literal and the figurative value of text, value of poetry, value of fiction. Yeah, so just little ideas sparked by what Christian was saying.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Anna, I really love when I discover your poems in digital version, because in a lot of your poems we can hear your voice reading the poem. We have the experience with the visual component, with the text. So what is the best way to appreciate your poem? Is it to read it on a book, or to experience the digital version?
Thank you for that question. And I also love your work, Pierre.
Thank you very much.
I'm leaving my camera off because it keeps kicking me
Okay,
out.
that's okay.
Yes. I think the best way to enjoy a work is the way that you like it. I mean, I think that this can be a very different answer for not only different people, but even the same person at different moments. So I think that, maybe one day you're in the mood to hear the poet's voice reading the poem and to see visuals that somehow enhance or comment or are intention with the words being spoken and written. Other times you prefer perhaps to just, sit with a book in silence and let the book speak to you. I think that the wonder is to vary, right? There's a saying in Spanish that basically just says, I guess in English too, right? Diversity is the spice of life. I think that what most of the poets who come to the verse express is kind of a wonder at seeing their poems brought to life in completely unexpected and new forms. We just had, for example, a friend of mine who's the founder of the Oh Miami Poetry Festival. It's a wonderful, wonderful community-oriented festival in Miami whose mission is for every single resident of the city of Miami to encounter a poem during the month of April. That is its singular mission. So like they, put poems in supermarket receipts, in billboards, just anywhere you can think of. And he's used to seeing poems, you would think, in new forms, in new formats, in the unexpected. And he just can't get over how the artist with whom we paired him for an exhibition interpreted his poem. He's written me, he's like, I can't get over it. It's so fantastic to see my poem brought to life like this. And that's the fruit of collaboration, in allowing someone else perhaps also to interpret your poem, which is a form of release and power at the same time, because you're allowing your vision to expand, but you're also, quote unquote, sacrificing control. You're letting someone else run with it. So I think that to get back to your question, there's no answer really. The best way to experience a poem. I think that it's amazing to just serve a very varied platter for audiences who are consuming art and engaging with art, via screens, via the digital, and to answer to them and to speak their language can empower poetry without, of course, ever neglecting the, hallowed and beloved object of the page and paper book.
Thank you very much, Anna. When we're having this conversation between image and language, we're using the work of artists and writers and create dialogues. But I think we might also use another angle that I don't see very present in the conversation we have in Web3 and in the blockchain, which is the religious approach. In the 8th century AD, during the Second Council of Nicaea, bishops of the Christian religions came together and have this very important conversation about whether to allow icons and images to be used in Christianity to explain and promote the religion. And there was a big debate, and in the end, they allow the use of image that was previously banned. And I think this is this constant tension and dialogue between image and text also can be explained through religion. I would define this tension as an emulsion. If you put water and oil together, it's not going to mix perfectly. And if you put text on an image, it's very difficult to make them work well. So what do you think about this religious approach to offer a new light on this debate? Christian?
Well, I'm assuming that you're asking these questions because, of course, in most of the world there, it's Good Friday. I'm going to respond by noting that, again, the relationship of conceptualism to the history of the arts has something to do, I think, with this dematerialization of the image, the disappearance of the thing you look at to into something that's an idea that is articulated, rather, ultimately via language, that you tend to see in the history of conceptual art, an effort to transform an artwork into something that would become fundamentally grounded in linguistic expression. So there's the disappearance of the image into the word. But by the same token, in the history of poetry, there's an effort, at least throughout much of the 20th century, to transform the word into something more imagistic, right? I mean, there's a history of imagist poetry that's attempting to produce a painterly set of effects, almost ekphrastic in its ability to evoke an image clearly and concretely. Not to mention an increasing interest in the materiality of words themselves, of linguistic material as an artistic medium. Hence the arrival, or at least the resurgence of conceptual writing that's concrete poetry, visual poetry, an interest in asemic writing, that a kind of poetry that you would look at rather than read, a willingness to consider the illegible or unreadable components of our textual experience and transform those into something experienceable in a gallery context. I think there's a tradition, certainly among the avant-garde, in which this interplay between image and word and their respective dissipation, evaporation into each other becomes a source of new affordances in poetic expression. And they're not always appreciated. I mean, what I like about the advent of the blockchain is that it has now caused many very normative poets with more traditional lyrical backgrounds to take more seriously the affordances of the internet, I don't know, to increasingly render the work in a more multimedia environment, to produce a greater richness of sensorial experiences of poetry, if not a greater diversity of ways in which to experience it, of the sort that Anna has pointed to, or even of the sort that Sasha has noted in the history of mechanical reproduction. Just the idea that we could actually produce works that would take on the characteristics of photographs or other mass media that are reach large audiences and are exchangeable at great scales. Normally, we've associated those kinds of works with image-based media. That mass media is, I think, very informed by an experience now of images, of pictures and photos and videos, movies, and poetry has now found ways to at least comment upon it or think about it or react to it. And incorporate new technical affordances to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Christian. Sasha, can we use religions, a history of religions, to explain this dialogue between text and image, and is it relevant right now?
I really like your invocation of the idea of iconography. I think that that's something that is quite intriguing. I don't think that I've thought of it quite in these terms of coming from religious tradition, but I do think that there's something really, really fascinating that you're pointing to there. I mean, the way that I'm thinking about this, just hearing you talk and hearing Christian talk, is that, even though I consider a lot of my poetic artworks to be artworks, they're not visual art in the traditional sense. Like, they're not illustrated in any traditional sense. I think for me, I tend to really like the idea of thinking of the words themselves as the image and thinking of the poems themselves as sort of the thing that has that has the visual interest in them, much so, much in the vein of what Christian was just saying in terms of talking about the visual poets, the concrete poets, asemic poets. Like those are traditions that I definitely feel like I'm, or that I hope I'm carrying the torch for. And really just sort of looking at the text of the things that I'm writing as sort of the imagery themselves in a way. At the same time, I mentioned before, a lot of my work has to do with artificial intelligence. And, one way that I've been working with AI over the years has been working very much with generative text, but that also has a lot to do with, or the AI that I've been working with, the systems that I've been working with are also the systems that are underlying and powering many of the text to image systems that are now becoming so popular and so trendy. Systems like Midjourney and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and all of them are actually rooted in language. They're visual systems, they're image making systems, but they all, come from systems in which, in which AI are trained to sort of tag and label and categorize pictures of the world and images of the world. And I think that goes to, or that points to something, again, that's at the heart of what you're asking, Pierre, which is about the relationship of words to image and just how sort of inextricably intertwined they are. And a lot of the work that I have done that's ventured a little bit more into the illustrative or the the more traditionally illustrative category has been playing with text to image tools. For example, there was a poem that I released last year called Completion Fragments, it's a long generative poem that is published in my book Technology, but I also released it as a collection of 30 media-rich text blocks, which comprise both the AI generated verse, but then also I use the text itself to generate images and generate sort of iterations of the language of the poem, and like use artificial intelligence both as a writer, but also as an artist in different ways. And so the idea there was to really play with the way that words and image are really two sides of the same coin, and to think about that through, especially through the lens of artificial intelligence, which is, the area of focus for me. So I don't know if that answers your question about religion, but when it comes to techno-spirituality and this new religion of the collective consciousness and creativity powered by AI, like I think that's an area that's vastly underexplored or under discussed, is really how much of creative AI is powered by words, and how these systems are turning all of us into poets.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And I'm going to use the last part of your answer for my question to Anna. Anna, do you think that the blockchain and the crypto movement is also a spiritual movement on top of being a technological revolution? What is the level of spirituality you see in this movement?
I think it's a really personal question for every artist and every person to answer, as it is in not only in the context of Web3 and our explorations of it, but in our context as humans and as individual people going through life. I personally am a very spiritual person. I've been very religious, and then that religion has transformed greatly since I was a child. I used to pray the rosary every single night when I was in second grade, and then traveled with the Bible in third grade, and promised myself I was going to read the entire thing, and then got really bored with all the begets of the Genesis, all the begats, and I actually have a short essay about it that I need to at some point try to publish, about the Genesis begats, and the boredom of the begats. But I think religion is a personal subject. My book that's coming out in April is about my family's sort of efforts to try to find a form of spiritual practice that feels right to us, that it feels like we're teaching our children something, that we're leaving them with a way to maneuver their own emotions and what the world is going to throw at them. And I think that, you know, this will apply to you if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're anything, if you're, you know, a professor, if you're a student, if you're, you know, a Web3 artist, pioneer like Pierre is. I think spirituality is something that you have to discover on your own. And I can't say that I see much of a uniform or identifiable form of it within Web3. I can only share that I recently actually produced a poem. That's funny. I wrote and produced a poem for a Web3 native gallery called Epoch. And the poem is called Oración, which means prayer in Spanish. And it's a recasting of one of my favorite poems by a Colombian poet named Maria Carranza called Oración. And I've been reading the book when the gallerist called me and asked me if I wanted to contribute something for this poem that wanted to explore how artists were using artificial intelligence in ways that he felt were innovative, and if I was doing anything in my own practice. And I told him that I was actually trying to translate the poem from Spanish into English by visualizing it through text-to-image generation in the translation, and that I was, you know, trying to write also a poem that wasn't a translation, but just an interpretation of it, and sort of to triangulate the original text with my rewriting and with the visuals generated by a more faithful translation of the original Spanish text. And that poem is called Oración, and it explores, of course, all the institutionalized rendering of religion, of, you know, our posturing, the fabrics, the architecture, the words, the shadows, even I think the smells, the incense, the murkiness of what our imagination and what our collective digital memories of what religion and what prayer means, you know, from all different cultures. I mean, I got a very, very diverse and really startling outputs, or let's say the dialogue was a fruitful one with the AI, and then I put that in contrast with the words that I created of the poem, and it was, for me, it was a really beautiful and spiritual experience.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this beautiful answer. So it's now 11:53. So I would love to have at least one or two questions from the audience. So if you have some questions for Christian, Sasha, and Anna, please, you're welcome to write the audience. I'm going to check I think it should be in I'm not completely familiar with this technology, so I guess you have an option to write a question in the chat. So if you I see we have a great audience here. So yeah, I think if you go in the room chat, you will be able to write a question for our guests.
Correct. Please leave your questions or comments in the room chat here. Yeah, as we approach the end of the hour, we would love to hear from you. And just a wonderful, wonderful panel so far. So
thank you so much. I mean, Christian, Sasha, and Anna are the absolute best poets here. So this is wonderful information. Thanks to them. So don't be shy. You can ask any question. So I'm sure if you go in the room chat. Oh, okay. So we got a question from a person named Spiritual Music. And the question is, I'm reading the question. What does techno spirituality really means? I don't know. Maybe one of our panelists have an answer. What does techno-spirituality really mean? Who wants to answer?
I like this idea that artificial intelligence might have a role to play in our rethinking about religious conviction, because of course we're creating something that we might rely upon for advice, for a kind of prayerful request that needs to be fulfilled. And we might actually have that prayer answered, so to speak, by this technological affordance that just out of the blue summons an answer to us and hands it to us. We can already see some sort of sphinx-like, sphingeal character to AI already, a spookiness that seems to partake of the ghost in the machine, perhaps, that begins to, I think, transform our relationship to technology, so that it's not simply a tool that we use, but maybe something that we come to rely upon with a greater and greater metaphysical, reliance. It becomes something, from which we derive companionship, or in some cases, I think even pretty big affordances. That we were given things by it.
Thank you very much, Christian. We have another question that probably will be one. Okay, we have. So a question: is AI a divination? We're still in the same field. So I think Christian just gave kind of an answer. So the next question is from Robert Pollock. Verse as a project and all the panelists as poets are totally inspirational. Does chain matter? Does audience matter across class, caste, background? Does your family know about your work? What do they say? So I think that's a great question. Thank you, Robert Pollock, for this question. So who would like to answer?
I mean, I can chime in. Well, thank you for that question. The last part of it made me laugh. My family and some of my friends know a bit. My husband knows a bit, but like no one really understands, I think still. They're learning. So chain is really interesting. When we started the Verse, we intentionally set out to be a cross-chain gallery, because I think, at least like my understanding of different chains and different platforms is they're all sort of different communities and different personalities and different sort of aesthetic approaches and, different audiences. There's people gravitate towards different chains for different reasons. And I think we really wanted to reach different audiences. Much of our mission as a gallery is to make poetry accessible. And a lot of that means kind of cutting across some of the built-in divides that exist even here in Web3. And so creating an interoperable gallery is definitely something that is important to us. Just trying to make sure that, if somebody wants to read or experience a poem, that it's relatively easy to do so. I know from my own personal experience, I started on Tezos, which is a proof of stake blockchain, and have been very passionate about advocating for Tezos from the very beginning, even though a lot of people started on Ethereum and were telling me not to. And the reasons why were, I think, even more important back then. But eco-friendliness, efficiency, all those things are definitely very much at play there. I think those kinds of considerations are certainly important and are also very personal. I mean, maybe they're a form of religion in a way. Really matching a blockchain with your values, I think, is important to long-term enjoyment of being in Web3. And a lot of those values are really reflected in the communities that grow up in and around a blockchain's ecosystem. So that's one reason why I've been particularly vocal about Tezos from the very beginning. But at the same time, yes, there's lots of other blockchains that are doing really important things.
Thank you very much, Sasha.
Really yep.
So this concludes our panel, and I really want to thank so much Christian Bock, Sasha Stiles, and Maria Caballero. That was an honor for me to be with such amazing individuals, and thank you very much to Bella Irons for having organized this panel.